Fear can be rational and irrational. Rational fear protects us from actual sources of danger. For example, when crossing the street, when we hear the brakes screeching, a whole series of biochemical reactions are triggered that prepares us for fight or flight. When we get out of dangerous situation, the fear disappears and the person returns to a state of normal functioning. This kind of fear is natural, normal and desirable. But there is another kind of fear, which is undesirable, and it is called psychological or irrational fear. And it is the way the ego speaks to us. It is not caused by actual danger sources, but by ego-driven thoughts and unpleasant mental images. And that fear manifests itself as aggression or passivity. If we are afraid of other people's opinion, the aggressive ego will stand out and impose itself, showing he is the best, and the passive ego will please those whose opinion he is afraid of. That's why, as always, the truth is in the middle, in harmony and balance. Naturally conditioned fear protects us from risk and danger, and irrational fear limits us in maturing. As in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, it makes no sense to live in fear and shut down, fearing all possible outcomes, and on the other hand, ignore the apparent threat to health. However, it is crucial to understand that most of irrational fears that controls us and distance us from the truth, we are unaware because they don't cause immediate suffering. To help you understand this, try to take a few minutes. Close your eyes and imagine your life without a single fear. Please try. Give yourself a minute or two. Would you live the life you live and be the person you are? Here is the list of all ego fears. Let's recognize and face our fears. Nothing prevents us but ourselves. And most often, deep or not so deep within us, we know what is true and what fears we feel. Maybe sometimes we don't give importance to the truth and fears we feel inside. Maybe doubt silences us. And maybe we deliberately ignore the truth and fears in ourselves. We ignore them as if they will go away, but they never do. They come back even stronger and louder. So we impose, resent, argue and get angry, thinking that something is wrong with the world. But something actually is wrong with us, because we ignore the truth and our fears. And it's always a question of how to stand and face those same fears. The answer is quite simple. Make a decision. I can't stress enough the importance of this, because behind a lot of our suffering is a lot of our bad decisions. Our decisions can be both conscious and unconscious. If we are unconsciously selfish or passive, these are all our unconscious decisions for which we are responsible and which have created our current reality, whatever it is. Unawareness is no excuse. It's like you're breaking the law because you didn't know about it. Therefore, let's decide to find the truth, face it and follow it. The decision to become aware, to be independent, to experience solitude if we must, not to be selfish, not to get attached, and not to take easy way because we are afraid. And thus, the death of fear and the freedom of truth is guaranteed. And only we can make the decision. It couldn't be simpler. Because our soul, that wants to self-realize and fly to the peak of its own existence, is changed by fear that prevents us from seeing the truth. And, as with any oppressor, freedom can only be earned by facing that same oppressor. Therefore, if we are afraid of change, we must encourage it ourselves. If we are afraid of loneliness, we must get to know it. And the most courageous decision is to forgive. To ourselves and others for weaknesses in maturing. Because it's okay to slip up and make mistakes. Forgiveness is pure love, and a necessary part of maturing. It is the beginning of any recovery. To forgive others for all their immaturity, the fears they imposed on us, and the injustices they did to us. Forgive ourselves for all our mistakes, immaturity, and ignorance. And that forgiveness will close the cycle of immaturity and ego fears that are passed down through generations. Because it is our responsibility to stop the fears that we have inherited and acquired, so that we don't pass them on to new generations. Nothing in the world requires more courage than facing yourself and your fears. Courage to follow what we see and recognize as truth. So simple and powerful. And therefore, let's have the courage not to be liked by others, stand up for ourselves, not get attached to ideas and let go of material things. Let's have the courage to make mistakes and not care about other people's opinion and not live up to social expectations. Let's have the courage to ask more from life and not settle for mediocrity, not bend to someone else's ego, and most importantly, let's have the courage to follow what we intuitively know it's right and our path. Because when there is no courage, there will be a weakness. We prefer to light a joint, drink alcohol, kill ourselves from work, buy ourselves something nice, came up with some belief as an excuse, and run like a guinea pigs on our own wheel. All this so that we don't have time to deal with why we are here, ourselves. But it's okay, we can always change, it's never too late. It's only our ego again trying to convince us in that idea. Our maturation is a marathon, not a sprint. Let's just listen to our soul and silence our ego with self-control. The first step of courage is to distance ourselves from thoughts and emotions through self-control. Because when reality does not suit the ego, rage and anger appear, which are manifested as aggressiveness. At that moment, the person will threaten and argue, and the ego will give the owner an advantage over anyone who can hurt at that moment, because the ego is the most important. Let's recall, for example, any family quarrel and the terror that the ego caused and the devastation it left behind. The only way to silence the ego is after our awareness has recognized it and our conscience has concluded that it is wrong way, self-control, so not to do any damage. First to others when the ego awakens, and then to us when the ego quiets down and sees what kind of desolation it has left behind, and shame and grief appears. When we silence our ego and anger, we won't do anything we regret. This prevents remorse after potentially destructive behavior, and in the long run, there is no harm to us or the environment. And with that, we open space for self-examination, what led us to the state of ego in the first place. Because as soon as we got into the state of ego, we did something wrong. External factors can never be the reason for our weakness. Only and exclusively ourselves. And with this, we can become aware of the ego challenges behind our behavior and prevent them from repeating. Because when we change how we speak, we will also change what we speak. We don't just control our anger and rage, the manifestations themselves. We control our entire ego and the ego challenges it sets. When he tells us to lie, or when he makes us always talk about ourselves, our opinion, and what we like and don't like. We control him when he says that only material things are important, or the country in which we are born. We control everything that is not true and everything that is ego. Self-control is not only important for strong emotional reactions and stepping on a brake for our ego. It is also extremely important when we have to press the gas. For example, when the truth shows our path, and we have to bring any decision that is not natural to us at that moment of maturity. We often need self-control to say simple no, to control ourselves so that we don't please all the time. No is a strong word that we shouldn't be afraid to use. When it's time to say no, it's important to understand that we are obligated to ourselves to do so, and that this will certainly cause a negative reactions from the other side, experiencing the rejection. But it is a price we must be willing to pay to strengthen our emotional maturity. Or we will need that same self-control if we are used to saying no and want to open to life and new experiences to start saying yes. Self-control is always necessary when we want to adopt a new behavior. When we identify so much with our false identity, we will surely feel that by self-controlling that same ego, we deny our personality. For example, we always attach ourselves to things and ideas, and we consider this a part of our character, because that's who we are. Fortunately, we're not even close. Because everyone who started on that path of truth and began to silence their ego, attachments in this case, describes that emotional journey as a path through a fog. Because by deviating from the usual path that we are used to, we feel that we are losing ourselves. When we control ourselves, we think we deny our identity, who we are. And in fact, we only control our ego and thereby silence it. When we control ourselves and thereby tear the ego, we feel we are tearing ourselves since we have grown together with it. So much that this process of separating the ego from our soul can also physically hurt. It is very important to understand that this is a normal process of silencing the ego, and that we will comprehend what we wanted to overcome after we get out of that fog. We will learn why it is important not to attach ourselves only after we stopped attaching to our things or ideas. We will get out of that fog after we persistently, with self-control, silence the ego, that is, our attachments. For a while, about 2 months, let's follow and adapt new habits, rejecting the attachments, and thus, we will face our fear of freedom behind this ego challenge. In the beginning, we need a lot of mental energy for self-control. Over time, we need less and less of that same energy for controlling our ego challenges and following the truth, so that in the end, without any great effort, we can completely comprehend that experience. Like when we learn to drive a car, we first have to think about shifting gears, and later we do it automatically since we have comprehended this experience. The best part of all is that the energy of the ego does not disappear, but is transformed into love and creative energy, and we become more motivated, focused, calm, understand better, and listen more carefully. Only in that fog of maturing, we must have faith to follow the path of truth, path of love. My name is Zoran Salopek, and in the next episode we will talk about faith and love.